You are listening to Fruitless, a podcast hosted by me, Josiah Sutton. This is episode 7, The Culture War is a Spiritual Problem, featuring AJ. That's the case, I will go ahead and say welcome everybody to Fruitless. I am joined today by AJ. No last name.
Yeah, I don't have one. I wasn't born with one.
Born with one, yeah. Anonymous AJ. Do you want to do a quick here's who I am kind of thing?
Yes. So I am not disclosing my last name or a lot of identifying information only because I have a job in media. So,
right.
This isn't, related to my job, and I just,
Yeah.
Not that we're, talking about anything that I think could, get me in trouble, but...
No, yeah, this is a really controversial subject we're getting into here.
Yeah, I just... You gotta stay paranoid.
I got you. Yeah, so I asked you to come on to talk about just, the culture war in general, which I know is already a overdone topic as is, but you made an interesting comment, a back and forth we had on Twitter, where you had said the culture war does matter, but why it matters is it matters in a weird way because the battle that the LGBTQ rights had done was not legal. It was primarily through cultural, and so now you have I think the quote was that you don't have any legal protection, but somebody can see an Oreo ad with a gay guy on it and decide to do a hate crime.
Oh, yes. I mean, the things that people say and the kinds of, oh God, I hate using the word discourse.
I know.
But discourse that is around who people are and about communities and groups, it has material consequences for people. A perfect example today was that I took 30 minutes out of my day to report a bunch of tweets from trad Catholic right-wingers who were literally just doing blood libel on Twitter.
I saw that. That was really bad. Yeah.
That is a perfect example of sure, maybe that kind of stuff is considered a culture war issue, but blood libel throughout history has had really, really serious, deadly results for Jewish people, and it still does to this day. I'm sure that because of all the discourse going on right now about abortion, every time a Jewish group pipes up and they're well, we have a more nuanced view of abortion, it turns into well, Jews want to kill babies with a certain segment of the population, and as a result, some poor community synagogue is going to get firebombed. That's a very real material result of what someone might consider to be a less material culture war issue.
Yeah, it's got kind of a weird, I don't know, kind of a weird two-way thing, because I think I think among a lot of white dude dirtbag leftist types, and I would say even I fell into this camp at one point, the attitude was kind of well, as a Marxist, I'm a materialist, and so this stuff about representation or whatever, it's it's kind of a facade, it's a smokescreen for what actually matters. However, on the flip side, you do see a correlation of hateful depictions of trans people and then murder rates, and that's a real material thing, and so it matters. But where is that middle ground line between just falling for kind of liberal talking points of considering it a victory because there's a gay character in a Disney movie, a nice scene that can be removed for the Chinese market, or being this is the most important thing ever, versus completely disregarding this entirely?
Well, you know what? I think that, I don't know if this is the right way to word this or if I sound like a fucking idiot, but there is almost there's the culture, the dominant culture, in like a sociological sense of how people relate to one another, and then there is pop culture. And I
Sure.
do think that pop culture is a reflection of sociological culture, but I think that the culture in terms of like cultural norms has
Hmm.
huge material effects on, you know, LGBT people, on women, on religious minorities, on racial minorities, on, you know, you name it. And that like the socio-political climate has material effects on people who, you know, find themselves to be society's scapegoats.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so, you know, it's actually like I think ultimately what the issue is that like I think liberalism doesn't have a response to like the actual issues plaguing our society. And I actually like, you know, if you really ask me for a hot take, I think that America has a spiritual problem.
Do you have a more to say on that specifically?
I mean, I think that you know, for things with like culture war issues, the reason why people talk about media so much is because like pop culture has become like one of the big dominating forces in their life. Like instead of like entertainment has become way too important to people. They're too important. They're too obsessed with being entertained at all times. And like movies and TV shows and like shit that they read and watch on the internet and all of the consume. Like the reason why I think it's a spiritual problem is that like not that I think that, you know, everyone needs to run to their like nearest house of worship, but I mean, Jesus fucking Christ, you can't find like anything else to do but like talk about the latest Netflix series and like, you know, it just to me is that it does feel like, you know, that response where it's like, well, like, you know, we can just like keep investing all of this energy like into pop culture. Like, why? Like, don't you have anything else going on in your life? Like, isn't there anything else you care about?
Yeah.
Like, particularly, I see the way that like conservatives are affected by the culture war, and it what really like what makes me sad is like, you know, my parents are very conservative, and I think that my dad gets sucked into this like culture war shit where he lets like Ben Shapiro and Fox News like make him insane all day. And it's interesting because like when I think about like his view of the world is that like I think that my dad has always needed to like escape into media. Like, you know, when he talks about his childhood, he talks about like watching a lot of TV, and he's like really into like John Wayne movies, and like, you know, his sense of like patriotism and like what America is and like all of these like things that he views as like good and positive come from like fucking media that's like in the 60s and 70s, and like now everything has changed on him, and like sometimes I want to look at him and be like, Dad, like you watch too much TV, like that's your problem, like you're obsessed with what's on television, like why are you upset over an advertisement? The advertisement's purpose is to sell people things. Like, why are you offended by it?
Yeah.
It's an ad.
Yeah. Well, and maybe there's something to that. I think the kind of spiritual deprivation that people, I don't know, people seek escapism in media to some extent. And so for a conservative homophobic guy, the presence of a gay person in his media is almost an invasion of his form of escape, you know?
Yeah.
Is kind of what I'm gathering from kind of your stance there, because like, yeah, if you have no sense of the transcendent and the transcendent becomes what you consume, and then what you consume starts getting filled with things that make you uncomfortable.
Not to get all galaxy brain, but like people are not involved in like their immediate communities enough.
No.
They're
Not at
not
all.
present in their lives. And, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I am very guilty of this too. My
Same.
fiance gets mad at me all the time because I'm like looking at my phone way too much.
Same.
Like
Same.
instead of being in the room with her and like talking to her, like I am very often distracted by inconsequential bullshit. And I am, humble enough to admit that like she's right. Like I'm not present in my daily life, and I think that like almost nobody is. Like who is actually like practicing like sincere mindfulness? They're certainly not on twitterfucking.com.
No.
Like nobody on Twitter has ever even considered practicing mindfulness and like being present in the moment.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Why would you do that when you can be 180 replies deep into an argument between an ML and a Trotskyist?
Yeah, but but you're right to point that out. I think what's scary is that the problems that this produces isn't just not being mindful in your life, which is enough of a problem. Not being, not taking care of the people that you love, or, spending any time with your loved ones, but also that like it does seem to create real world impacts. But I don't know, you like going back to kind of the original thing with like LGBTQ rights and stuff like that. You have a guy that has spent his whole day arguing with people on Twitter and eventually decides to go do like a hate crime.
Oh, yeah.
it does seem to like have a connection. I don't know. And so, yeah, I think you're right to see it as like symptomatic of kind of a spiritual crisis culturally.
One of actually, as brainwormed as people think this is, I think that one thing that is actually helping people is that, like, for people who are chronically online and alienated from people in their lives, I think that they're finding community on Twitter, and sometimes that can be really, really bad, but I also think that it can be good.
It can be good,
like,
yeah.
I think that, like, I feel like I've developed many positive relationships on Twitter. I met my fiance on Twitter, and that's the best thing that's ever happened to me. But, at the same time, like, the pro-life lady who was, that she had, like, fetus parts in her cooler, like, that's the other end of the spectrum, is that, like, she was also involved in an online community. And then we all had to sit down and have a powwow about like how this person online who we've interacted with before has done something unbelievable.
I'm so glad I took a break from Twitter for Lent, and I was so glad that I was off Twitter for that when that happened, because it was just tense enough. Arguments broke out on like Discord servers I was in. But so okay, for those listening who aren't
who aren't terminally online and talking to like the weirdest, most fucked up people on there.
This did make national news, so you might have known the story, but not known that, like, I mean, kind of the circles of Twitter that AJ and I both are on was adjacent to this person, and so we got to watch this just spiral.
I would like to clarify before Josiah says anything else that I was not mutuals with this person.
I was not either, and I would say that also.
I have mutuals who are mutuals with this person.
Yes.
And so I know what happened.
Yeah, but the long and short of it is, was it the FBI or the cops? Someone raided her house.
It was the FBI.
Raided her house and had found that she had been stealing fetus remains from various like scientific testing things, and so like they've just found coolers of fetuses, and there was a claim that she was trying to give them a proper burial, which maybe that's true. However, like I don't know, I don't think you have fetus parts in a cooler for a week.
I'm not going to speculate.
I don't know the intent.
I mean,
the point is somebody got really deep into this shit online and then did some really weird stuff in the real world.
I have a small, locked, very exclusive Twitter alt that, like, I only talked to a couple of people on it, including Josiah, and I was wildly speculating on there as to, like, what she was actually doing with these parts. You know, maybe that's a flaw of mine that, like, I'm sitting there and I'm like, I think that this is what this crazy fucking bitch is doing with this. So I'm not going to speculate on this podcast as to what she was doing with those baby parts. Maybe she wanted to give them a burial. Maybe she's insane. I mean, she's definitely insane, but
a bunch more details came out, and I at some point I just stopped keeping up with it because it was so batshit and just put me in such a weird mood every time I read more details. But yeah, because by the end it sounded like they hinted at this had been happening for a few years, and they had like a lot of fetuses. And
oh boy,
they were trying to build up so I don't know if you caught detail.
Speaking of the culture war having material consequences.
Yes. So yeah, and this is the result of somebody spending a lot of time online. And she was also doing a lot of activist work as well, because I know somebody who lives in the same city as her, and she's like, yeah, this person is notorious for terrorizing the Planned Parenthood here.
Oh so, yeah, from what I understand, like every person who works in Planned Parenthood in the DC area knew this person.
Yeah. And and she was able to be encouraged by a lot of people online, because I think even the more level-headed pro-life people probably would have condemned her if they'd known the extent to which she had done stuff. Not all, I would say, but the extent. But she wasn't talking about the extent of harassing people that she was doing. She wasn't talking about that on Twitter.
So, I actually think that there's multiple culture wars going on.
Okay,
I think that there is, the people who are offline that are engaged in, the broader culture war that leaks out to, legacy TV media and things like that. And then there's, much nicher, online culture war shit, which is completely fucking incomprehensible to anyone who's not online. Like I said, my dad's really mad about, a lot of really stupid culture war shit, but my dad is completely offline. He has no Facebook, no social media whatsoever. He kind of gets brainwormed on, YouTube, but, whatever. Mm-hmm. He's not, online, really. So, a perfect example of shit being totally incomprehensible was I was peeing my pants. Somebody took out a billboard in Times Square and it said in big bold letters on a plain black background, Taylor Lorenz doxed Libs of TikTok.
Libs of TikTok actually is a good thing to bring up here in this conversation also, but holy shit.
Put yourself in the shoes of a 70-year-old Malaysian tourist to New York City who's on one of those little red tour buses snapping pictures of Times Square with a disposable film camera. Yeah. And they just see this billboard that says Taylor Lorenz doxed Libs of TikTok. And just letting that information hit them and just wash over them for a second, and they continue to go about their life. I think about this person who lives in my head that I made up and imagined because I think that that's who I want to be when it comes to the culture war deep down inside.
Well, and I think a lot of people do. That's why, you see the joke on Twitter all the time of kind of a joking, ironic love for a dummy that has no clue what's going on. Because you see being grill pilled or, yeah, it would be like the joke, or saying like, oh, I just want to grill, or, you know, there's kind of like this, depending on what part of Twitter, you don't see many people who are like, oh, normal people suck anymore on Twitter, because I think they all kind of secretly hope that they could get out.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you know, like, I wish that there were, like, so many things from Twitter that, like, I could just erase from my brain.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not proud of the fact that I know who Lauren Handy is, the fetus lady.
Yeah, the fetus
I'm not
lady.
proud of that, you know?
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say is, you know, so like the kind of chunks of Twitter we're on is a very niche, like, you know, religious socialists kind of vaguely. That's its own thing. But like, it's really interesting how, yeah, if you get into the culture war from a right-wing angle, you can see these like spirals of freaking out about things that kind of happen like once every couple weeks, and they zoom in on something really niche. And yeah, if you are not plugged into the Fox News discourse, you will be baffled. And it's kind of funny because you see that meme going around a lot of I support the current thing. You know, that like, you know, like right wingers use, which is baffling to me, because I think they're just as guilty, if not more. And then their examples of supporting the current thing is like caring about Ukraine or abortion, which to me feels much more substantial than, you know, getting mad at a journalist who reported on a Twitter account. But
yeah, no, it's like, I always find that accusation hilarious, because it seems like conservatives have completely lost their fucking marbles. Like, they care about shit that is completely inscrutable and makes no sense to anyone else.
yeah,
Like, I'm sorry, but like, if you care about libs of TikTok being doxxed, like, no one has ever needed to touch grass more.
yeah. You know, if you care about, you know, again, like somebody who filed an LLC because their Twitter account was so big, so this was public Googleable information, and a journalist putting that in a piece, like, what are you doing? but Libs of TikTok has a real grip on the culture war, because, you know, the TikToks that they would dig up and then, you know, cause a whole freak out would go on to Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson would get mad at like a 14-year-old that identifies as wolf gender for a week or something like that.
Yeah, and it's also not just him. Like, the entire right-wing media ecosphere is completely built upon just like looking at the most brainworm shit online and like showing it to some like furious 80-year-old man and being like, this is what kids today are doing.
This is, yeah, and acting like it has some sort of, because these are aggregator accounts that like deep dive into, you know, some TikTok account with 80 followers making a joke to their friends, or if they're not making a joke, saying something crazy. But like, I don't know, if anybody remembers being 14, you know, you say and think stupid shit, it's not worthy of like, you know, this big picture thing. But it ends up having like this big picture impact, because like, I know a lot of right wingers were making fun of her for it, but like Taylor Lorenz like she got actually doxxed at a point, and she actually did get death threats. And I told this on Mammonberg, but I give this example a lot of a thing that happened here in good old backwoods Des Moines, Iowa, where we made national news because of a cancel culture discourse thing. There's this guy, Carson King, who held up a sign at like a football game or something that said, you know, had his Venmo on it and said like, Venmo me to give me beer money. And then it happened to get shown on TV, and he received $1 million on Venmo. And so then he just,
fuck out of here.
No, yeah, for real. So he donated it to charity, and, you know, some people wrote a feel good piece about it. Now, a journalist who I actually know got to be the guy to write the profile on him. And he had to, because of this is what happens when you do a profile, he had to look into his past, and found that Carson King had made a few tweets when he was like 15 that had the N-word in them. Okay. And so when he did the profile, he was like, hey, do you want to make a comment on this just so that like I have something, you know? because I have to do this. And so, yeah, Carson King was like, yeah, I was 14. I was quoting a Tosh.0 bit. I'm not proud of it. It's not who I am, et cetera, et cetera. And the journalist, who I'm not naming just because I don't want to continue the hate that he got from this, he ran it past the Des Moines Register. He's like, do I have to include this in the piece? This just feels kind of unrelated. And they were like, yeah, you do. So he stuck it at the very end of the piece, just a quick, hey, I found some like racist tweets from him. He says it's not who he is anymore. Done. Tucker Carlson picks this up. A lot of people pick this up. And this journalist has canceled Carson King. And so then in reaction to that, Anheuser-Busch had planned to donate also $1 million, like match his donation, and put Carson King's like picture on a beer can or whatever. They decided not to put his picture on the beer can anymore. So now this is cancel culture gone awry, this poor child, et cetera, et cetera. And it turned into this massive culture war issue for a while. Now, the missing piece of the story that I get from being on the ground that people don't realize is Carson King was fine. Him and the journalist were on good terms. Carson King did not want the support that he got. The journalist had to go into hiding. Literally. The Des Moines Register fired him for doing the thing that they had told him to do. And,
really?
Mm-hmm. And
no, I'm sorry. I'm going to go on a rant here about my industry.
Yeah.
The editor who made that call should have been the one who got fired.
Absolutely.
It wasn't something that was relevant to the story. Like, they weren't doing a deep dive on somebody. Like, Carson King wasn't running for office. He went viral online. Like, leave it out. How old was he at the time when the profile was written? He was 15
like 20,
when he made the tweets.
Yeah, something like that. It was pretty young, and he's like he's like old enough to be at a college football game now.
Okay, so it was nearly. It was like maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and he was a child at the time. He was a minor. Yeah, no, the Register should have fired the editor who did that, and the fact that like they fired. Oh, wow, this is why people in media are unionizing like all over the place.
Absolutely.
Like, we're sick of being treated like this. It's fucked up. Yeah,
no, and I mean, like, the Register, like, I had buddies that worked at coffee shops near the Register. They had to do active shooter drills because people were planning to, like, bomb or shoot up the Des Moines Register or threatening to. And the thing is, so, like, the thing about a lot of the cancel culture discourse for me, and a lot of culture war in general, is the more dangerous thing is the people freaking out about the cancel culture rather than the cancel culture. It seems like more often than not, that's the fucked up thing that starts to like spiral into a national crisis. And the Taylor Lorenz story is pretty similar to me, where she didn't, you know, like her story was just pretty straightforward. She didn't dox anybody. She reached out to people for statements and like did some decent journalism on it.
You know, I'm not going to comment specifically on, you know, Taylor Lorenz because I don't think it's like appropriate to comment on any one particular person's actions. And it is very, very hard to get like huge sweeping things of like people hating you online. But I think that there are a lot of people in my industry that do not have experience dealing with like very right-wing people, and you know, my parents are kind of just like normie conservatives, but like I have known and I grew up with people who were like that, and I was exposed to it, and the way that those people, like, you can't dialogue with them and you can't really like try to get them to understand you. Like, they want to be like violent with you, and like you have to position yourself, like, you have to go on the offense. Like, if Tucker Carlson blasted my face on television and was, like, talking about, like, what a fucking shitty woke lib I was, like, I would say that, like, I would call him, like, Julius Streicher, who was the, he ran, like, the propaganda rag, like, during Nazi Germany, and I would, like, send him, like, pig pooping on his own balls, and, like, tell him that he's a Humpty Dumpty-ass egg-shaped bitch, and that, like, he's a little fancy pants rich boy who, like, went to a private school and wears fruity little bow ties. Like, I would be I would be completely just uncalled for. And I
Sure.
think that, like, that's the only way that, like, you can reply to somebody like that. Like, he
Yeah.
is particularly just odious.
Oh yeah.
Really, like, when I think of, like, all of the people within right-wing media, I don't know if it's just that he's, like, one of the most powerful voices, but, like, he is, like, the worst because, like, I'm actually not kidding when I compare him to, like, Julius Streicher, because I do think that, like, he selects, like, random victims of minority groups to highlight on his show, and then, like, mobs of angry people go and attack them. And he does it because it has made Fox News very, very wealthy, despite the fact that, his advertisers flee left and right because, like, oh my god, he is so, so, so close to saying who he really thinks the globalists are on TV. Like, I can tell that, like, he has, like, guests that are like, the same group of people work in government and media and for the big banks, and, we just have to be really careful about that one group of people. And, like, he's so close to saying it, but he knows that when he says it, that's it.
The ad revenue's gone, and yeah.
Like, he's already lost, like, all of his ad revenue, but, like, I think that would be the straw to get him kicked
Hmm.
off of, like, Fox News, but they keep him because he makes them a shit ton of money.
Yeah,
He's just
absolutely.
he knows what he's doing, but he won't say the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and no, I think your comparison is right because, like, I mean, Tucker Carlson with Christopher Rufo essentially created the critical race theory panic that we're watching right now, and
Yeah.
that's having like a real, getting back to kind of the materialism thing from, we were talking about. I mean, that's having a real impact, like material impact. You see, like, fucking parents everywhere are rushing school boards right now and trying to, I don't know, destroy people's lives. And the trans stuff, the grooming kind of topic, which is tied to the, libs of TikTok thing as well, accusations of grooming or whatever. You're seeing this battleground happening in the school boards because of freakouts that people like Tucker Carlson have brought to the forefront. And yeah, it's having like real scary impact. I mean, I think the New York Post today reported one of the first firings of somebody in Texas for bringing up, mentioning that she was pansexual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think that this is, like, too different from what was going on in the late 70s with the Anita
Mm-hmm.
Bryant Save Our Children movement.
Yes.
I
Yeah,
think it's very,
absolutely.
very similar, and Anita Bryant got fucking owned. Like, she really just, like, went into total obscurity, lost all of her sponsors. Like, she decided to, like, wage that battle against gay people, and she thought she could win because the dominant culture was on her side, and she lost.
Yeah. Why do you think she lost? I guess maybe what is the lesson from history there?
I think that you have to look at Harvey Milk and what
Okay.
he did. I think that his campaigning in California to overturn the Briggs Initiative, which was, like, part of the Anita Bryant Save Our Children shit, that really reversed everything because she got the gay rights ordinance repealed in
Mm-hmm.
Miami-Dade County in the 70s, like, just
Mm-hmm.
after they passed it. And then there were a couple of other, like, gay rights ordinances that got repealed in a couple of other cities. But the turning point was Harvey Milk's campaign in California, which, the guy who created the AIDS quilt, Cleve Jones, was also a part of it. And they were able to really, really, like, reverse the tide. And I actually think what I find so admirable about Harvey Milk is that he was a deeply positive person who, like, got up in people's faces and, like, wasn't afraid to engage with his political enemies. And he also showed solidarity with groups of people that other members of the gay community were very uncomfortable with. Like, Harvey Milk was able to create solidarity between the union truck drivers in California and the gay community because the the truck drivers were on strike because of a contract issue with Anheuser-Busch, like, or it might have been Budweiser. I can't remember, but there were a bunch of truck drivers that were on strike because of their contract with a certain beer company. It might have been Anheuser-Busch, it might have been Budweiser. But in any case, you know, they were able to have a successful strike because they were talking to Harvey Milk and he was talking to them. And Harvey went back to the gay community in San Francisco and convinced all of the gay bars to not sell that beer.
Okay. This is a great example, I think, because I think this comes back to this relationship between culture war and materialism again. Because I think what made him so successful was a very explicit grabbing at political and economic power, rather than,
Yes.
I think what a lot of liberals tend to do, which is when these culture war things happen, get in an argument about why Taylor Lorenz did something fine. You know, like get into an argument about why this culture war thing doesn't actually matter. Get into an argument about why critical race theory isn't actually what you guys are saying it is, rather than just like, okay, I'm going to fucking seize political power in some way. I'm going to get elected to office. I'm going to fight to get this repealed. I'm going to work with unions. I'm going to, et cetera, et cetera.
Here's a really important thing to remember about the culture war. Tucker Carlson is not a member of the working class. Tucker Carlson is a shitty little rich boy, like, who, like I, said, wears a fruity little bow tie, and he's a member of that class that he's complaining about. And he's positioning himself as, like, outside of that class because, he's, like, totally different and he understands, like, the conservative working man. And he presents himself that way. Now that he's decided to go all, like, alt-right, he, like, lost the bow tie and he tries to pretend like he hates all these people. Tucker Carlson is still getting invited to cocktail parties.
Yeah.
He still works for Fox News, and all of those people. Oh, and here's another thing, which is, like, this is why, like, I don't want to talk about, like, the specifics of who I am, because just, in my industry, like, the reporters who move back and forth between right-wing media and less, like, more central and, like, left-wing media, like, there's a lot of grifting going on, and, like, people kind of just doing whatever they need to do. And I actually think at, like, a low level, that's fine. Like, there are plenty of people who are, like, reporters for Fox News at, like, really boring desks that, like, don't write about anything interesting. Or, like, I don't really, like, freak out, like, if I, learn that somebody wrote for, like, a hard news desk at, like, a right-wing publication, because, it happens all the time. Like, most people are just looking for jobs. But, like, the higher-ups, like, the people in management at, like, the Daily Wire and, what's the other one I'm thinking of? The Daily Caller and Fox News, like, they all have friends in, like, normie media. Like, I actually think that, like, if you really wanted to get something done, you would, I think working class people who are negatively affected by the culture war should be focusing more attention on the rich liberal friends of these assholes who are spreading this information. Or misinformation, rather. Because, like, this shit would stop if, like, Tucker Carlson experienced, like, any material consequences for what he does. He actually does it because it's materially beneficial.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, and, you know, I mean, I fall victim to this, but the freaking out at him is part of how he benefits. You know, like it you know, that's because that's what he wants. He wants to get me outraged so that he can be outraged at my outrage. And then he has more segments and more grandpas in their 80s can get mad and keep watching. Yeah. So yeah, actually making some sort of material consequence for this shit.
Because, you know, it really, like, it's sad. Like, I think about how, you know, there are, you know, I was hanging out recently with a friend of mine who's, like, a trans woman, and I think that, like, when it comes to the anti-trans shit, some of the people who just get fucked with the hardest are simply trans women who don't pass. And my friend, you know, does not pass, and she's at peace with that. But then we went for a walk in the park, and, like, even in where I live, which is a very, very progressive city, the nasty looks people were giving her. Like, people were leering and gawking, and people were looking at me like, why are you hanging out with, like, it really is just, like, incredible how, like, you know, when these issues come into play, like, the people who are affected by it, it's like, suddenly it feels like every eyeball in the world is on you. Like, for what? It's very, very damaging. I also think that something that can, like, reduce the craziness of the culture war is, like, you know, my own parents, for example, like, they are significantly less insane about gay people than I think they otherwise would have been because they have a gay child and because I'm present in their lives and talk to them. And I think that, like, there is, like, a sense of alienation. And I think that, you know, going back to what I was saying about Harvey Milk, like, he wasn't afraid to, like, walk up to John Briggs and ask him what the fuck his problem was.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I have very little compunction about walking up to right-wingers and, like, asking them what their problem is. And honestly, when you do that to right-wing people, like, when you just, like, walk up to them as a peer and you're like, what's your problem? They actually usually stutter and they try to tell you that, like, you're an exception. That, like, there's, like, I have a guilty pleasure. I hate watch Ben Shapiro's YouTube videos. I'm particularly obsessed with watching him watch TikToks because okay, so
no, yeah.
Let me just say something about the Ben Shapiro Reacts to Woke TikTok series. Most of the time, it's just a bummer to watch because, like, all he's doing is being mean to some, like, random trans person and misgendering them. Like, that's, like, maybe 60% of the segment. However, maybe, like, 20 to 30% of the time, he's like, this is what woke culture has led to. And it is, like, the craziest thing you will ever see. Like, there is nothing funnier to me than watching Ben Shapiro go through the 5 stages of grief because he just forced himself to watch, like, a puppy play video on TikTok. And he's, like, watching some, like, gay trans guy, like, outside in his underwear wearing, like, a leather dog mask and, like, a butt plug tail going, arf, 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 arf! Like, watching his facial expression change with a side-by-side of the TikTok is that it's exquisite. I love watching it, but yeah, so I hate watch Ben Shapiro sometimes. And I was watching one of his videos once, and a conservative gay man called him up and, like, asked him, like, why he has so much animosity, like, towards gay people. And he started, like, stuttering. And he's like, well, if you talk to most conservatives, they'll eventually tell you that, like, they have a gay friend here or there, and, it is what it is, and their beliefs don't necessarily mean that they can't have, like, a civil conversation with somebody, but X, Y, and Z, like, brainworms culture war talking points that he's pushing.
Yeah, that this represents something bigger than, again, like, just people on TikTok. I
actually think that, like, the anger of the culture war and these, like, this outrage against trans people, outrage against gay people, outrage against women who have abortions, this and that, I really do think that, like, when you approach these people and you actually just, like, talk to them as a normal person, I think it causes a great deal of shame. And shame can be a very powerful motivator in changing people's behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've found that a lot of that shame doesn't have to be even induced with, like, a really performative lecture about why they're wrong. You could just be like, why do you fucking hate this person for doing nothing? Like, this person just exists. Why do you hate them?
Yeah.
It has been really, really baffling. I know this has been the case forever, but the most recent iteration of it being, like, wokeism, supposedly, and trying to act like people being different than them is some sort of coherent ideology that is taking over the West in any really real sense, has been really baffling rationalization for things that make you uncomfortable online.
Puppy play is a scourge that is taking over the culture and morals of the West.
The internet, like, I think it gives you this temptation because it presents information to you in, like, one tweet I see is about the crisis in Ukraine. And then the next tweet I see is a TikTok from a account with 60 followers doing something weird. And those are then kind of treated with the same epistemic weight of, like, importance, because of just the way that happens, the way that data is organized. And so you can kind of, like, get caught up in, again, just somebody, like, I see terrible takes on Twitter all the time that do not represent the majority of people's opinions, but it's easy for me to make some sort of judgment about, like, the state of the culture based off of it.
It is so addictive to be mad all the time, and I'm also guilty of that.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I have to stop reading, like, brainworm things on Twitter and, like, letting myself feel emotions. Like, what a waste.
Well, yeah, and I mean, if this stuff, like, really does piss you off, I mean, for one, you shouldn't make any real judgments about the culture based off shit you see on Twitter, but, kind of like the lesson that comes out of, like, Harvey Milk or something like that is, then if this is a concern for you, the, like, when it should be, like the stuff that's going on with, like, CRT, freaking the anti-woke stuff that's happening, just, like, try to swing by your own school board or, like, what's going on in, like, your actual local communities and politics. Because, like, you need, like, an actual political response to this rather than just being mad at people on Twitter, because it seems like the right has learned this lesson to an extent because they've started actually doing stuff about the things they're getting mad at.
Oh, yeah.
And it's scary.
There are way, way more people who have no kids that are showing up to school board meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that if you don't have a kid in the school district, you probably don't need to go to that meeting.
Yeah, probably not. But if it's already happening, then might as well, I guess. I don't know. Just like, I don't know. I think there's something about just not there's a tendency among a lot of, I think, liberals and leftists to not pay attention to actual political power as it exists in their neighborhoods or whatever, and instead just, get mad online.
I really do think that it is like the internet causes a lot of noise in people's brains. And I think that there have been a lot of political actors that are trying to, influence people to just sort of like give them like a more coherent ideology. And if there's one take I do have is that the far right is much better at doing that than the left.
Mm-hmm.
The far right is much, much better at radicalizing alienated people online and bringing them into their fold.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. I think in part because liberals and leftists have a tendency to, when they get into those ideas, see themselves as kind of like better. Like they kind of act like they've gotten to this intellectual position because they are incredibly smart or whatever, and they're kind of above it. And so like, you'll just say, you should just Google this. You figure it out yourself, rather than like willing to have a conversation in any way with people.
I mean, like, I feel like that point has been made
overdone a bit. Yeah.
Like a lot. Like, and it's true. But honestly, I think that what the left's problem is that, like, I don't think that anger and constantly being against something rallies people. And I certainly don't think it creates solidarity and community. Is that there needs to be more positive focus on, like, what you're fighting for, because I think that the left, it's always like against, like against this, against that, abolish this, like, it's exhausting, and people find it very like draining. And honestly, just like kind of taking like a panoramic view of like the millennial Zoomer left is that everybody is very, very depressed and deeply anxious, and it's because the culture of the left creates that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that, like, if they want to start, conservatives, reactionaries have a vision for, like, how they want the world to be, and it is, like, an ad from the 1950s. And, like, that's deeply brainwormed and doesn't make any sense, but at least they have, like, a vision for, like, what they think people should be like and what the world should be like. And leftists only ever do that, like, ironically.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that there's any real serious vision of, like, this is what we're fighting for. And not even just, like a mirage in the distance of, like, living through some sort of Marxist end of history, but, like, who are you fighting for? Are you fighting for kids? Are you fighting for people's health? Are you...
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of that gets lost. And actually, if anything, I think that is why, the Bernie campaign was like a shot of adrenaline into the heart of the American left, because
it got me knocking on doors. I don't do that shit.
Oh yeah, no, is that he exuded left optimism, and I think that, like, his campaign being shot down, I think it made a lot of people very angry and bitter. But, like, just because, like, he got rat fucked doesn't mean that you can't get up and try again. Like, if that's all you have in you, that, like, Bernie lost an election a few years ago, which is true for so many people, like, then very weak spirit.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But you're right to say, like, I think there is a real deep inability of the left to imagine what their utopia is, like what they want. Not to be naive and to believe, yeah, we're going to perfectly attain this utopia, but, like, you do still need, like, the utopia you're trying to build. And, the people that I think of who often have that, I find politically troubling on other on other angles, because I think they go to the past again as well. Yeah. And they'll point to, like, oh, we're trying to build the USSR here. And it's like, well,
why would you do that?
Why would you do that? Yeah. A lot of Leninists, they seem to have a very vivid image of what their idea is, but it's, right-wingers have an ad from the 50s. They have a, poster from a propaganda poster from the 60s or something. And, like, yeah, the USSR isn't going to happen here. I don't think it would be good if it did, for one. That's just from my own political persuasion, I'm more libertarian than that. But like, even if it did, it's not going to happen. We don't have the same material circumstances that produce that.
I mean, to be fair, like, the amount of people who, like, actually want that, infinitesimally small. Really, like, a truly brainwormed group of people that is, like, barely consequential. But, yeah, I always think, too, that, like, you know, you can't treat Marx and the Manifesto as, like, a Bible. It's not scripture. Mm-hmm. Like, you kind of have to, you know, as you're progressing forward with, like, left-wing ideas, like, you have to be a little more holistic in your thinking and kind of, like, meet people where they are and, like, adjust your messaging for the times.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think, you know, some left-wing people have a really hard time doing. Like, you shared a video of, like, some tanky shit where it was, like, words popping up on a screen in front of, like, a bunch of, like, vaporwave style pictures, and, like, the words were completely random, and I just want to say I was completely fucking smacked when I watched that video. I was so high, I was, like, no longer in my body. Tears running down my face laughing, because I'm like, this is what the inside of my brain looks like right now. And I'm like, this is like a perfect shitpost, and I think that what makes it so, like, mwah, like chef's kiss, is that it was clearly, like, deeply sincere, and the person who made it did not realize that they have completely lost touch with reality.
Oh, absolutely. They represented nobody, because it was also really reactionary. I remember the video because it would go back and forth between, like, communism, but also, like, family patriotism. Like, it was, well, I mean, it's kind of a kick I've been seeing of, like, a certain type of left, you know, like the kind of leftists that would be likely to cheer on Russia, not just be critical of support of Ukraine, but, like, actually be like Putin rocks, have a real, like, Nazbol thing going on that's pretty troubling at times. And that was what that account was doing. And yeah, it's like, not to just be a total white guy leftist theory bro and just reference Mark Fisher a million times, but, like, there's this, like, inability to imagine something new. Like, we're just beating our head on a wall, and so people are just grappling at old symbols, and those old symbols, like, will become reactionary the longer you spend with them. I almost feel like the longer you know, because the Soviet Union had a lot of reactionary elements and conservative elements to it, right? And, you know, like, a lot of people who are, like, genuinely believe that we're gonna somehow create the Soviet Union here, they do start latching on to, like, a lot of those conservative aspects of that ideology. I know it's annoying to just be like, I want something new, but that's the feeling I've been having for years. Like, I want a genuine new feeling leftist direction.
Yeah, you know, you can't have a reactionary movement. You can't look backwards. Nobody wants that. If they wanted that, they would go to the right. But I think that looking towards, like, a brighter future is really hard. And I think that that's why so many of them have this negative, like, we're all going to die in, like, a fiery climate change natural disaster tomorrow. You know, it's easier to be that way. It's easier to believe that you're going to die in a climate change flood in 10 years. Because if you feel that way, then, like, you don't have to think about, like, self-improvement or, like, developing relationships or, like, planning for the future. And so it's easier to just believe that you're going to be dead in 10 years.
Yeah, it's it's Fisher's thing of reflexive impotence. It's like all we know how to do is just kind of, like, feign this just kind of defeat before it's even happened. Like, man, there's a chapter in Capitalist Realism that's entitled "What if we held a protest but everybody showed up?" Because like, which felt like the protests that happened in 2020 over, like, Black Lives Matter stuff. That kind of felt like that for me, where I was shocked at how many people actually went out in the streets. It got crushed, But that was like one of the few moments of like political optimism I'd had in a long time, because I saw like people actually doing stuff. And I hope that the ramifications of those protests can kind of like live on, is just like actually realizing that there, I don't know, revolution, protests, whatever you want to call it, is kind of a creative endeavor. And the act of like getting out and organizing and stuff like that will help you begin to have an image of what you think the possible future is, I think.
I think that like another thing too that like, you know, when the left talks about like the culture war and stuff with kids, is that like sometimes I ask people on the left like, well, have you considered raising kids? Like not even just like, you know, not everybody wants to have them, but it's like, have you thought about like going through the process to become a foster parent? And like none of them are thinking about that. Like, and I actually do think that like one of the things that the right is trying to wield with the culture war right now is that like for the most part there are a lot of normie parents out there, but there are way more right-wing parents than there are like left-wing parents. Like, let's face it, our side is always the side that like doesn't want to have kids. There are some there though. I know some left-wing people that have kids, like actually genuinely left-wing, but like I think that like where that like post-Zoomer generation is going to end up with all of this like culture war shit is that like it's a toss-up. They might end up really, really conservative like their parents. They might rebel against their parents and like be really left-wing. But like I do think that, you know, the greatest like win that you can have in the culture war is like influencing the generation that comes after you.
Yeah, well,
but you know, we have to be anti-natalist because we're all going to die in 10 years. So like, why would you have a kid? I joke all the time that like I'm like, okay, well, like maybe you don't want to have kids because there are going to be water wars in 20 years, but like my kids are going to win the water wars in 20 years and they're going to have the most water. Like, I'm training be like, why would you want to have kids in this hard world? Be like, I am going to train my children to be the most ruthless Mad Maxian. Like, in that case where everything is completely falling apart, like, my kids are going to be the smartest. They're going to know what to do.
I really like this point a lot, though, because, you know, so much of the right is around, like, save the children, right? That's the phrase that's been coming back. And I've been really baffled by the conservative, the way that we have allowed conservatives to have claim on terms like family values and save the children. Because when we talk about like okay, the anti-trans legislation going on in a lot of like southern states right now, you have you know, cases where like a parent who chooses to be supportive of their trans kid could get in trouble for that, you know, like that could be considered child abuse. Yeah. And for me, that's not pro-family remotely. No. That's tearing apart families, especially because like regardless of how you view trans people, I'm sorry, a parent that chooses to support their kid with that, there's no way you can make an argument that's a bad mom. Maybe a mom you disagree with. There's no way you can argue that's a bad parent.
Well, they're trying to argue that letting your kid transition is child abuse because you're confusing them. Yeah. The right loves to take the right loves to break families up and alienate kids from their parents when it serves their agenda.
Exactly.
This is very true of I mean, they've been doing it to Black communities and indigenous communities for forever. I mean, God knows how long.
Yeah.
And they do it. Honestly, you know, if we were going to talk about like the foster care system and CPS, like that's a whole other episode.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But like, you know, it's it really is like it's the same kind of hypocrisy that they have around abortion, because like they don't actually care about like the people that these fetuses are going to materialize into.
Yeah.
Like they
no,
don't
absolutely
care.
not.
Like there's some kid born to like a single teenage mother in the middle of buttfuck nowhere, like, you know, really poor probably. Like they don't give a shit about that person. It's all
No.
ideological. But the thing is that pointing out the hypocrisy of right wingers doesn't really do anything, because they know they're hypocrites. They don't care.
No, but I guess what I don't mean just to point out the hypocrisy, but I almost I think of it almost as taking a step further, because, you know, I was going to also point to, obviously, like, you know, Save the Children could equally be a slogan to talk about climate change.
It could.
Very easily.
Yeah, it could.
And I'm not necessarily saying that we should embrace that, but there's an aspect that I almost think, yeah, we should go further than just hypocrisy, but also
what was the name of that?
Just like, good.
There was a movement of that. It was a movement of like teenagers that really care about climate change, and I remember like they went to DC, and Dianne Feinstein like wagged her finger at them, and it was a real precious moment there. What are they called? Sunshine something?
Oh yeah, Sunrise Movement. Yeah, they're
Sunrise. Yeah,
they're great. Yeah. No, but like, I don't know. I think you're right. This whole like the antinatalist kind of attitude is probably bad, because I think there's a lot of power in saying like, no, we are doing this for families. We are doing this for our, you know, the next generation that's going to have to inherit this earth. Like, I do think that allowing the right to have taken those slogans was just really disastrous.
Another hot take of mine is that the Brunigs tried to do that, and people really hate it.
That's
They're
true.
Really big angry.
Although the people who hate it tend to be lefties.
Liz Brunig is a kaleidoscope of like her presence online is a Rorschach test for like what your deepest insecurity is, regardless of like where you fall on the political spectrum. Like, right wingers have a lot of like sexual obsessions with her.
Oh,
and the left does as well. Like when they keep trying to say that she's like a fashy mommy, that feels very psychosexual to me.
Yeah.
And then like liberal women really, really hate her, like blue check, like lib femmes, and they hate her, I think, because she represents everything that they think that they're supposed to be, because I think that a lot of them are actually very insecure in their choices, and that even though they try to claim that they're secure in their choices, I do think that there is a Liz Brunig-like figure that lives in their head rent-free at all times, and when they see a woman doing the things that deep down inside they believe they should be doing, it, like, makes them mad. Yeah, so, like, I do think that she produces a very, very wide array of mental illness, you know? And I think it comes... I really do think it's like a Rorschach test of like what's wrong with you.
But yeah, I think there's something to I think like organizing around maybe concepts of like families and stuff. But you know, kind of like you'd pointed out, I do think a lot of the left turns on that because of, I don't know, this like antinatalism thing that I think is fucking stupid. But
well, my fiance believes that people who hate kids have something metaphysically wrong with them, which is that's a very I mean, that's certainly a hot take. I mean, fair enough, but I do think that like when leftists talk about like abolishing the family, you know, I think that they don't really like understand or know what they're talking about, and I think that a lot of them are just reacting to the fact that a lot of people on the left have been alienated from their families in like one way or another, and I think that a lot of it might be like psychological projection. Like they're alienated from their own families, and like they think about how much they hate their dads, so like they hate families now. But I think that, it's when you're talking to people like that, a constructive way of moving forward is being like, okay, well, like, that's a you problem.
Hmm.
And, like,
Yeah.
there are other, people who, don't want to die alone or live in a polycule. So,
I think we should probably move toward wrapping up here. But I do like the focus on treating children as kind of a central part of this culture war conversation.
yes, children are ultimately the biggest losers in the culture war because each side of the culture war despises children. The right the right wing despises children and sees them as little more than like a tool to get what they want and to further the political project that they envision. And the left wing despises children because they view children as a scourge and a burden. And even though they don't want to use this word, they view them as like, you know, extra mouths to feed that don't work. Useless eaters, basically. And there is no one on either side of this dimension really that in my opinion really cares about kids like as a class. Children are the most marginalized people in society, like as a collective class, and I don't think people think of it that way, but children are a class of people.
Mm-hmm.
And they are completely, when they're at home, their parents are the authoritarian rule over everything that they do. And then, when they go to
Like,
school, not to get all Foucault on people, but
mhm.
schools are a bit like a prison and, you're told what to do. So I think that these two domains where the left and right are fighting, the home and the school,
Mhm.
neither one particularly has any love for children and wants to see children thrive and grow emotionally, spiritually, and physically.
Mhm.
But that is ultimately who loses. And you know when it comes to the culture war, children are the group of people that are talked about the most, but they're also the group that are taken into consideration the least.
Yeah. I think that's a really good statement to wrap up on. So I will say thank you everybody for listening to Fruitless, and thank you so much for joining me today, AJ.
Have a good night, Josiah.
You as well.
Bye.